If debuting young in K-pop is so normalized, then why are there still so many examples that make people uncomfortable? And why does it continue to be questioned when you look a little closer? Why do minors debut in K-pop? Honestly, I don't think there's just one simple reason why minors debut in K-pop. It's a combination of factors, and most of them tie back to how the industry operates and what benefits companies the most. One major reason is longevity. Idol contracts are typically around 7 years, so debuting someone at 16-18 means they'll only be in their early to mid-20s when that contract ends. From a company's perspective, that's ideal. If someone debuts at 22 or older, they'll be closer to a stage in life where they might want more independence, a different career path, or even to start a family by the time their contract ends. That can clash with what fans expect, especially in an industry that thrives on consistency and long-term engagement. And fans play a huge role in this. K-pop relies heavily on parasocial relationships, and those relationships can become complicated when idols' personal lives don't align with fan expectations. A good example is Chen. When his personal life became public, the reaction from parts of the fandom showed just how intense and restrictive those expectations can be. So from a business standpoint, debuting younger idols can delay those conflicts and extend the period where idols fit the image fans are most comfortable with. Another factor is control. When idols debut as minors, they are often not the ones fully in charge of their contracts. Their parents or guardians are involved. While that doesn't automatically mean something negative, it does mean companies are less likely to face direct pushback from the idol themselves. Older trainees are more likely to read, question, and fully understand the terms they're agreeing to. Younger trainees, on the other hand, are still developing that level of awareness and independence. Because of that, younger idols can be easier to shape. Companies can train them not just in singing and dancing, but in how they present themselves, how they interact with fans, and how they fit into a specific concept. It's easier to build an ideal idol from the ground up than to adjust someone who already has a strong sense of identity or artistic direction. There's also the visual and conceptual side of things. Younger idols naturally fit youthful concepts, bright, energetic, coming-of-age styles that are very popular in K-pop. That youthful image can create a sense of innocence or relatability that companies know how to market effectively. It's not just about how they perform, but the image they project. On top of that, younger idols tend to create stronger parasocial connections with fans, especially fans who are close to their age. There's something about seeing someone your age or close to it succeeding that feels more personal. It creates a different kind of emotional attachment. Fans feel like they're growing up alongside the idol, which builds deeper loyalty over time. And that loyalty often translates into consistent support, streaming, buying albums, attending concerts, and staying invested for years. You can see how powerful that dynamic can be with groups like New Jeans, where the youthful image and relatability played a big role in building a strong and dedicated fan base. Whether intentional or not, that kind of connection is incredibly valuable to companies. Debuting minors benefits companies in multiple ways: longer careers, more control, stronger fan attachment, and easier branding. But just because it's beneficial from a business perspective doesn't mean it's without issues. It raises valid concerns about autonomy, pressure, and whether young idols are truly able to make fully informed decisions about their careers. That's why this topic keeps coming up, because people understand why it happens, but they're still questioning whether it should. The concern around minors debuting in K-pop isn't something fans just made up out of thin air. It didn't come from nowhere, and it's not based on people being overly sensitive or trying to create problems where there aren't any. Whether you've been into K-pop for 1 year or 10, at some point you've been exposed to situations that make you stop and think, wait, this isn't right. Over time, people have seen patterns. Young idols being put under intense pressure, expected to meet impossible standards, and sometimes placed in environments that feel exploitative. This isn't limited to one group or one company either. It's something that keeps showing up across the industry, and even in K-pop adjacent groups trying to follow the same system. You see it in the way companies manage idols, in the expectations placed on them to be perfect at all times. and in how quickly things can turn when public perception shifts. One moment, an idol is praised, and the next, they're being heavily criticized, all while still being expected to perform, smile, and keep going like nothing is wrong. And when those idols are minors, it raises even more questions. Because now, it's not just about the industry being demanding, it's about whether it's appropriate to expect that level of performance discipline and emotional control from people who are still growing up. Why shouldn't minors debut? It's a question with many answers, but one of the most immediate and undeniable is the level of hate they are exposed to. The K-pop industry is notoriously unforgiving. Idols are scrutinized for everything, from their appearance to their skills, often under a microscope that leaves no room for growth, and minors are not exempt from this. If anything, they are often treated even more harshly. Take Hong Eun-chae as an example. At just 15 years old, she was criticized and mocked for something as normal as having acne on her back. By 17, she was being harassed for her vocals, labeled as bad by people who felt entitled to tear her down. This criticism didn't remain at the level of opinion. It escalated into direct harassment and even threats. Situations like this are not rare. They reflect a broader culture where young idols are expected to meet impossible standards while still growing up. The level of pressure placed on idols in K-pop is already extreme, but it becomes even more disturbing when you look at how minors are treated in that environment. Something as small and human as having acne, can turn into a wave of criticism and ridicule. And that's just one example. Kids in this industry have been dragged for far worse, often over things that shouldn't even be issues in the first place. For the singing. While I do think singing is a basic expectation for idols, the demand for perfection, especially in live vocals, is where things start to spiral. There's a difference between constructive criticism and outright harassment, but a lot of fans don't seem to know where that line is. Idols who struggle vocally don't just get feedback, they get insulted, mocked, and reduced to nothing but their flaws. Bringing it back to Eun-chae, after Coachella, her entire group, LE SSERAFIM, went through one of the harshest waves of public criticism. But Eun-chae specifically, with member Sakura, became a major target. The hate toward her vocals escalated to the point where she had to turn off her comment section. And when it gets to that level, it's no longer just criticism, it's sustained harassment. What people don't seem to understand is that turning off comments is just the visible part. That's maybe 1% of what's actually going on. We don't see the full impact. The stress, the anxiety, the way it might affect her confidence or mental health. And the fact that she's so young makes it even worse. No teenager should have to deal with that level of scrutiny over something like singing. And then there are even more extreme cases. Yeri from Red Velvet is one that still genuinely upsets me. When she debuted, she was bright, cheerful, always smiling. But over time, you could visibly see that change. The constant hate she received just for joining the group at 14 years old was relentless. She was criticized for something completely out of her control. Then at 18, she experienced a deeply personal loss with the passing of Kim Jong-un. And instead of empathy, she was met with even more hate, this time for expressing grief. People criticized her for crying, for showing emotion as if she was expected to be a robot. But the irony is, if idols don't show emotion, they get criticized for being cold or fake. It's a no-win situation. Another example is Suyu from Twice. She was heavily attacked simply for waving the flag of her home country, Taiwan. That situation escalated because of political tensions between Taiwan and China, and it got so severe that she had to publicly apologize. Imagine being a teenager and having to apologize just for expressing pride in where you come from. It's genuinely absurd. These situations highlight how unforgiving the industry and the surrounding fandom culture can be. It doesn't matter how young you are. It doesn't matter if the mistake is something minor, personal, or completely out of your control. Once people decide to hate, it rarely stays at a normal level. It escalates quickly into something intense, overwhelming, and often deeply harmful. That's what makes the conversation about minors in K-pop so important. What makes this even more concerning is the rise of increasingly toxic fandom behavior. Trends like calling someone the next dead idol may be framed as dark humor or exaggeration, but in reality, they function as indirect encouragement of self-harm, essentially telling someone to kill yourself without saying it outright. Minors are fully exposed to this environment, reading these comments, internalizing them, and carrying the emotional weight of thousands of strangers' cruelty. This constant scrutiny and hostility inevitably take a toll on mental health. Young idols can develop severe anxiety, become hyper-aware of every mistake, and feel immense fear every time they step on stage. Performing stops being about passion and becomes about avoiding backlash. When even seasoned idols struggle under this pressure, it highlights just how damaging the environment can be. For instance, Sakura, an experienced idol with years in the industry, has openly shown moments of vulnerability, even breaking down due to the fear of making mistakes. If adults with years of experience and developed coping mechanisms find it overwhelming, it raises an important question. How are minors expected to handle it? Debuting minors means placing children in a high-pressure, hyper-critical environment where perfection is demanded but rarely achieved, and where mistakes are punished publicly and relentlessly. It forces them to grow up too quickly, often at the cost of their emotional well-being. Instead of being given the time and space to develop their skills, confidence, and sense of self, they are thrown into an industry that profits from their image while exposing them to its harshest realities. At its core, the issue isn't just about talent or readiness, it's about protection. No child should have to endure that level of scrutiny, hate, and psychological pressure as part of their everyday life. It's not just about debuting young, it's about what happens after they debut. The expectations, the scrutiny, the lack of room to grow or make mistakes. It's a system that demands perfection. At the end of the day, the issue isn't just that the industry is demanding, it's that it's often cruel in the way it enforces those demands. Then, there's the mistreatment idols face from their own companies, and in many cases, these companies can be just as harmful as the fans. Behind the polished image of the industry, there are long-standing issues with exploitative contracts, financial mismanagement, and a lack of basic protection for artists. A well-known example is Luna. The group's situation exposed how deeply unfair some idol contracts can be. Members were locked into agreements that heavily favored the company, where despite years of work, albums, performances, promotions, they reportedly earned little to no income. Instead, they were burdened with debt due to how costs were structured, meaning they were essentially working just to pay off expenses rather than actually being paid. The contracts were designed in a way that benefited the company while keeping the idols financially trapped. And even when these issues become public, escaping them isn't easy. Legal battles are long, expensive, and emotionally draining, especially for young idols who may not fully understand what they signed in the first place. This power imbalance makes it incredibly difficult for idols to advocate for themselves, particularly minors who rely on adults, often the very people exploiting them, to guide their careers. More recent discussions around groups like Viv Is, Bad Villain, and The Boys have brought attention to similar concerns. There have been claims that despite actively working, some idols were not properly compensated and in extreme cases had to cover their own transportation to schedules. Reports of idols moving without adequate staff support, such as managers or security, raise serious safety concerns as well. In such an environment, idols are expected to maintain a public image, perform at a high level, and represent their company, all while lacking the most basic forms of support behind the scenes. Situations like a member being removed from a group, as mentioned in the case of The Boys, also highlight how little control idols often have over their own careers. Decisions that drastically affect their lives can be made without transparency, leaving them to deal with the consequences publicly while having little say in the matter. When you place minors into this system, the risks become even more serious. They are not just facing public scrutiny and hate, but also navigating complex legal and financial structures they may not fully understand. Without proper protection, guidance, and fair treatment, they are especially vulnerable to being taken advantage of. At that point, it's no longer just about whether minors can handle the spotlight, it's about whether the system itself is safe enough for them to be in at all. You can lose your job at any second in this industry. There's no real sense of stability. Everything depends on public perception, company decisions, and circumstances completely outside your control. Now take that reality and apply it to minors. Look at Hearts to Hearts. Reports and discussions around the group point out that some members have already made major sacrifices for their idol careers, like leaving or deprioritizing school. With only 2 continuing high school and only 1 graduating, it raises a serious concern. What happens if this career suddenly ends? Because that's the risk. idol careers are fragile. One controversy, one shift in public opinion, or one company decision can change everything overnight. And if a young idol is removed from their group, they're left in a difficult position. Their training has been highly specialized, focused on singing, dancing, and performing. But outside of the industry, those skills don't always translate easily into stable career paths. Add to that the fact that the industry is oversaturated. For every pretty face, there are thousands of others with the same dream, the same training, and the same ambitions. There's also this idea that being under a big company guarantees safety or protection, but history shows that's not true. SM Entertainment, for example, is one of the biggest names in K-pop, yet many idols under the company have faced controversies, removals, or difficult treatment. Take Sunghan, whose situation showed how quickly public backlash can escalate and how a company may respond under pressure. Or Lucas, Winwin, Baekhyun, Chen, and Henry Lau, all of whom in different ways have experienced backlash, mismanagement, or controversial handling of their careers. More extreme cases include Jessica Jung and the members of JYJ, formerly TVXQ members Kim Jae-jung, Park Yoo-chun, and Kim Jun-soo. Their departures didn't just mean leaving a group, it reportedly led to industry blacklisting and long-term career obstacles. These situations highlight how little control idols can have once conflicts with their company arise. So, being under a major label doesn't eliminate risk. It often raises the stakes. The higher the profile, the harder the fall. If a scandal happens, it's amplified. If a company decides to cut ties, the consequences can be even more severe. Now imagine a minor in that position. No completed education, no work experience outside of being an idol, and suddenly cut off from the only career path they've trained for. If they try to go independent, they may face industry barriers. If they try to start over, they're competing in an already crowded field. That's the core issue. Minors are being asked to gamble their entire future on an industry that offers no guarantees. And when things go wrong, as they often do, they're the least equipped to recover. Then, there are the cases that go beyond harsh conditions or unfair pay, situations that raise serious concerns about safety, abuse of power, and the vulnerability of minors in the industry. Take Gayeon. Her situation brought attention to just how dangerous the power imbalance between idols and company executives can be. She later came forward, initially anonymously, with allegations that she had been sexually harassed by her company's CEO. According to her account, after a situation involving breaking dorm rules, the CEO used that as leverage, telling her she had to listen to him, and even demanding she act as his girlfriend for a period of time. This is not just inappropriate, it's a clear abuse of authority. Before her statement, fans had already noticed warning signs. She went inactive, unfollowed the group and the company, and was placed on hiatus without clear explanation. When she eventually shared her story and filed a lawsuit, it confirmed what many suspected, that something serious had been happening behind the scenes. While updates on the case have been limited or unclear publicly, the situation itself is enough to highlight a larger issue. Minors are often placed in environments where the people they rely on for their careers, CEOs, managers, staff, hold immense power over them. When that power is abused, young idols may feel like they have no choice but to comply. A similar pattern of concern appears in the case of KG, who filed a lawsuit against JYP Entertainment's American division. Her claims included violations of child labor laws, stating that she was allegedly forced to continue working even while injured. There were also allegations of financial exploitation, such as being given the choice to live in a dorm, and then having to pay off extremely high living costs themselves. Reports mentioned a dorm valued at millions, with the financial burden placed on the members. Beyond that, there were claims about strict dieting expectations and the overall environment affecting the members' mental health. The pressure to maintain a certain image, combined with overwork and lack of proper support, reportedly pushed some members to extremely dark places mentally and wanting to commit. When conversations around this situation mention the member was as young as 14, it becomes even more alarming. At that age, they are still developing emotionally and psychologically, yet they are being placed under extreme pressure with very little control over their circumstances. You can also tie this into broader discussions around young groups like New Jeans, where debates about age, concept, and protection have been ongoing since debut. Even without a single scandal, the conversation itself shows that people are increasingly aware of how vulnerable minors are in this industry. All of these cases point to the same underlying problem. When minors debut, they are not just entering a competitive field, they are entering a system where they have very little power. They depend on adults for contracts, schedules, housing, safety, and career decisions. If those adults act in their best interest, things can still be difficult. But if they don't, the consequences can be severe. That's what makes this issue so serious. It's not just about whether minors are talented enough or ready to perform. It's about whether they can truly protect themselves in an environment where so much power is held over them. And time again, these situations show that they often can't. New Jeans and 50/50 are often cited as key examples of why minors debuting in this industry is such a serious issue. Not because their situations are identical, but because both reveal how vulnerable young idols can be inside systems run entirely by adults with power. The situation shows a different kind of risk. Manipulation and emotional influence from the very adult idols are supposed to trust. With New Jeans, the controversy around leadership, management, and influence sparked widespread conversation about how close relationships between executives, artists, and families can blur professional boundaries. Fans and commentators raised concerns about whether the group was being placed in a position where loyalty, dependency, or emotional closeness could be leveraged in ways that aren't healthy for minors navigating a corporate environment. A lot of the discussion has also centered around their relationship with Min Hee-jin. While she undeniably played a major role in shaping their concept, branding, and success, the way the members have publicly spoken about her has raised concerns for some people. It goes beyond simple respect or mentorship. To many, it comes across as an intense level of admiration that borders on dependency. Some may interpret this dynamic as a mother-figure relationship, but others argue it feels less like guidance and more like conditioning, where the members are led to believe that their success exists primarily, or even solely, because of her. This kind of thinking can be dangerous, especially for minors, because it ties their identity and achievements to one person rather than their own abilities, team effort, or the structural advantages they already have, such as being backed by a major company like Hybe. The concern isn't just about credit, it's about influence. When young idols are made to feel that one individual is the reason for everything they have, it becomes much easier for that person to gain emotional control. This can affect decision-making, loyalty, and even public actions. The conflict between Ador and Hybe only intensified these concerns as the members appeared, at least publicly, to align themselves in ways that many felt were shaped by that influence. A somewhat parallel situation can be seen with 50/50, who I will refer to as Bloom. Their case involved real and serious issues, including alleged mistreatment, overwork, and being required to continue schedules while sick. These are legitimate concerns that deserve attention. However, the situation became more complicated with the involvement of the givers. Reports and discussions suggested that while the group may have been experiencing genuine problems under their agency, external parties may have taken advantage of that vulnerability. The givers were accused of feeding the members certain narratives and influencing their decisions, potentially using the existing mistreatment as a way to gain control over the group's contracts and future. What happened there was far more complex than the simplified narrative of Attract is evil or the givers are evil. From what's been publicly reported and debated, it looks like a situation where multiple adults and companies failed the group in different ways. The members were placed in a fragile position, and that vulnerability was then used by others to advance competing agendas. The result was that the people with the least power, the idols themselves, ended up caught in the middle. The allegations and accounts of poor working conditions, health concerns not being handled properly, and immense pressure to keep working despite serious physical and emotional strain. Whether every detail is agreed upon or not, the larger picture is hard to ignore. When you're young, under contract, and surrounded by authority figures who control your schedule, income, and future, it becomes incredibly difficult to know who to trust or how to protect yourself. That's the core of the problem. What connects both cases is the idea of emotional leverage. In the case of Min Hee-jin, it's the close personal bond she built, not only with the members, but reportedly with their families as well. In the case of the givers, it's the use of real hardship to build trust and then guide the members towards specific actions. In both situations, the idols were in positions where they had to rely heavily on adults around them, making it easier for influence, whether intentional or not, to shape their choices. And that's the issue. Minors are far more susceptible to this kind of influence. They are still learning how to navigate and often don't have the experience to question complex situations involving contracts, business disputes, or conflicting narratives. When you combine emotional dependency, power imbalances, and high-stakes environments, it creates a situation where young idols can be pulled in directions that may not fully be their own. Whether it's loyalty to a CEO, trust in a producer, or frustration with a company, their decisions can be shaped by the people around them, people who may have their own interests at heart. That's why these situations are so concerning. It's not just about who is right or wrong in each individual case. It's about recognizing how easily minors can be influenced when they are placed in an industry where trust, power, and control are constantly intertwined. And this isn't limited to just these two cases. There have been multiple reports across the industry over the years of idols being harassed by managers, pressured into silence for not complying with demands, or locked into contracts so restrictive they've been described as slave contracts. I've mentioned, some of these cases ended up in court, others faded into rumors and unresolved accusations. But together, they paint a picture of an industry where abuse of power is not rare, it's structural. The question isn't whether bad things can happen to adults too. They absolutely can. Being an adult doesn't magically protect you from exploitation, harassment, or manipulation. It doesn't make these experiences harmless or easy to endure. But more often than not, it does mean you're better equipped legally, emotionally, and psychologically to recognize when something is wrong and to seek help, representation, or legal protection. A child or young teenager doesn't have that same toolkit. When you put minors into an environment where adults control their housing, schedules, money, contracts, public image, and even access to their families, you're creating a situation where power is completely one-sided. If they get sick, if they're uncomfortable, if they feel unsafe, they often don't have the authority or sometimes even the language to push back. And when another adult steps in claiming to help or protect them, how is a kid supposed to tell the difference between genuine support and someone acting in their own interest? That's why these cases resonate so strongly in conversations about age. They're not just scandals. They're reminders of how much risk is built into the system itself, and how that risk multiplies when the people inside it are still children. So when people say adults go through this too, they're not wrong, but they're missing the point. The issue isn't whether harm can happen at any age. The issue is who is most vulnerable when it does. And in an industry where contracts are complex, power is centralized, and public image is everything, the answer is almost always the same: the youngest, least experienced, and least legally protected people in the room. Lastly, we have the sexualization of minors in K-pop. Beyond the pressure and unrealistic standards, there's another issue that people don't talk about enough or try to downplay, and that's the sexualization of minors in K-pop. There are countless situations where young idols are placed in concepts, given lyrics, choreography, or styling that are simply not appropriate for their age. This isn't about fans overreacting or reading too much into things. A lot of the time, the material itself is clearly suggestive, and pretending otherwise doesn't change that. A good example is Baby Monster and their track Like That. When you actually look at the lyrics, they are undeniably suggestive. Lines like, "'Cause all those girls know what you need, but I know the way to make sure you never leave, and if I come close, baby, would you like that?" aren't subtle. These are not lyrics that should be given to minors. And before anyone says, "You're the one making it weird," then explain it to me. What exactly is it about? And when you look at the members' ages at the time, Asa being 17 turning 18, Ahyeon and Rami around 16, 17, Rora 15, 16, and Chiquita just 15, it becomes even more uncomfortable. These are teenagers, and yet they're being placed into songs with themes that don't match their stage in life. People often try to flip the argument and say, "You're the one sexualizing them." But that completely ignores the reality of what's being presented. The issue isn't fans inventing meaning. The meaning is already there in the lyrics, the delivery, and the overall concept. If anything, the responsibility lies with the adults behind the scenes. Producers, creative directors, and companies who made the decision to put them in that position. What's also not being mentioned is that YG has a clear history of questionable behavior. Ignoring that background just makes the situation feel even more unsettling. And what I find especially insane is the photo I showed with the members' ages, because the two oldest are the only ones wearing pants. That kind of styling choice doesn't feel random, and it raises valid concerns about how these decisions are being made and who they're really for. You can also question the role of the creators Charlie Puth, who wrote to the song, but ultimately, the bigger responsibility falls on the company, YG Entertainment, for approving and assigning that material to minors in the first place. And this isn't an isolated case. You see similar patterns with groups like Cat's Eye. Even when members are technically legal or just turned 18, the way they're presented can still feel uncomfortable, especially when they have very youthful appearances. Yoon Chae, in particular, has been put into situations since the start where the choreography, camera work, or styling leans into something more suggestive than it needs to be. There are moments in performances and music videos where the imagery feels deliberately contradictory, pairing childlike elements like teddy bears or soft, innocent aesthetics with more mature or suggestive poses and movements. That contrast doesn't happen by accident. It creates a specific kind of image that can be unsettling, especially when applied to younger idols. And it raises an important question. Why are the youngest members always put in those positions? Often, it comes down to who looks younger or more youthful. That contrast makes it harder to argue that it's random or unintentional. The same issue shows up in choreography too. Younger members being given moves that are borderline inappropriate for their age, like suggestive hip movements or attempts at twerking, gets brushed off as just dancing or what girls wear or do. But again, these choices aren't being made by the idols themselves. They're being directed by adults in positions of power. Even earlier examples exist, like Tsuyu, who at 16 performed a noticeably suggestive elevator dance in a commercial. That situation sparked controversy for a reason. It was clear that a minor was being placed in a context that didn't align with her age. What makes all of this more frustrating is how often fans defend it. There's always an excuse. They're almost 18. It's not that serious. You're reaching. But none of that changes the core issue. Being almost legal doesn't suddenly make something appropriate, and looking young while being sexualized doesn't make it better. It often makes it worse. These are young people being put into situations designed and approved by adults, and those decisions have consequences. Whether it's the lyrics they're given, the choreography they perform, or the way they're styled and filmed, it all contributes to how they're perceived. And if people are uncomfortable with that, it's not because they're overanalyzing. It's because something genuinely doesn't sit right. I've spoken about this already, but I'll summarize what I said for this video. Let's address the "I'm her age and I dress like that" argument. That misses the point. This isn't about your personal fashion choices. It's about the context she's being put in by adults. Saying, "I wear that too," turns a real concern into a personal anecdote. It deflects from the actual issue. Whether the outfit is appropriate for a minor performing in a public, professional, and highly scrutinized space. One thing that keeps getting ignored in this conversation is the fact that idols, especially rookies, don't actually choose what they wear. Their outfits are decided for them by stylists, creative directors, and the company. They don't have full autonomy over their image, and that's something people conveniently overlook when they try to defend questionable styling choices. When people say, "But I dress like that," it completely misses the point. You choosing to wear something in your own life, in your own environment, is not the same as an idol being assigned an outfit as part of a concept. You have the freedom to pick something else if you're uncomfortable. Idols don't. Their choices are essentially wear the outfit given or wear the outfit given. That's not real choice. That's compliance. This is especially important when we're talking about younger idols or rookies who have even less power to push back. They're new. They're trying to establish themselves, and they're in an environment where saying no isn't always a realistic option. Fans also seem to forget that age alone doesn't determine appropriateness. Context does. A teenager at school and a teenager on a stage in front of cameras, fans, and media are in completely different roles with different expectations. Another argument people bring up is that if the outfit matches what the idol would normally wear, like in the case of someone like Lara, then it's somehow not exploitative. But that logic doesn't hold up. Being comfortable in an outfit doesn't remove the context in which it's being used. It doesn't suddenly mean the idol had full control over that decision. If the company had chosen a completely different concept, something softer or more modest, then that same idol would be styled differently. Regardless of their personal taste, the outfit isn't coming from the idol's independent choice. It's coming from the concept the company is pushing. So saying they dress like that anyway doesn't prove autonomy. It just shows that the company's styling happens to align with their personal style in that moment. That's not the same thing as genuine control over their image. What's frustrating is that these kinds of arguments don't actually engage with the issue. They're usually used to shut the conversation down rather than add anything meaningful to it. Instead of acknowledging the power imbalance, people deflect with personal comparisons that don't apply. Then there's the idea that once an idol turns 18, the conversation should just end, as if turning 18 suddenly removes all concerns about exploitation or industry pressure. It doesn't. Yes, legally they're an adult, but the system they're in doesn't magically change overnight. The same power dynamics, expectations, and lack of control can still exist. Bringing up age as a cutoff point often feels like another way to avoid the discussion entirely. It creates this false sense that everything is suddenly okay, when in reality the underlying issues are still there. Now we have the but. They've always debuted arguments. I've been seeing this trend going around in K-pop TikTok where people debunk concerns about minors debuting by listing idols from older generations who debuted young. And something I've noticed in almost every one of these videos is this. They always focus on the youngest members, the maknae line, the exceptions, not the overall makeup of the group, and that's exactly where the argument falls apart. Yes, minors debuting in K-pop is not new. It never has been. But what is new is the scale of it, the quantity of minors debuting at the same time in the same group as the industry standard rather than the exception. Back then, you might see 1, maybe 2, sometimes 3 underage members in a larger group. It wasn't rare, but it also wasn't the norm. Now, especially in 5th gen, it's becoming increasingly common to see groups where the oldest member is barely an adult and the rest are 12-16. That's what matters. BoA debuting at 13 was never normal. It shouldn't have been normal then, and it definitely shouldn't be treated as acceptable now. But look at the reaction today. SM debuts a girl group where the oldest is 18 and the youngest is 14, and people shrug and say, oh, another group. Meanwhile, you'll hear fans call someone born in 2005 old for 5th gen. Let that sink in. A 19 or 20-year-old being labeled old in an industry that revolves around performance, pressure, and long-term contracts. That would not have happened in older generations. And yet fans keep repeating, well, they've always debuted young. Not like this. Not to this extent. Let's actually look at the numbers instead of cherry-picking examples. Twice had 3 minors at debut. BTS had 1. EXO had none. SNSD had 3 out of 9. Red Velvet had 1. Blackpink had none. This was not normal in 3rd gen, even some 4th gen groups. Now compare that to newer groups, where it's not uncommon for most of the lineup to be under 18. It's more common to find a maknae under the age of 16 than to find a maknae just being 16. Eunice had 7 minors. 7. That's not an outlier anymore. That's becoming a pattern. And when you start looking at this pattern from a long-term perspective, it stops feeling accidental and starts looking structural. It's unsettling how clearly it benefits the industry. Debuting idols, younger and younger, doesn't just shape their early careers. It extends how long the industry can profit from them. When you look at someone like BoA, who isn't even 40 yet, but has already spent more than 2 decades in the industry, it becomes obvious how valuable that kind of longevity is to companies. From a business standpoint, it's easy to see the appeal. Debut someone at 13 or 14, and by the time they're in their early 20s, they've already given you a decade of labor, brand recognition, and marketable history. They're still young in the public's eyes, still fresh in terms of image, but they've already been shaped, trained, and molded entirely within the system. That's what makes it feel less like career development and more like long-term exploitation. The younger an idol enters the industry, the more control the company has over their image, habits, and public identity. Their formative years, the period when most people are figuring out who they are, what they value, and what they want from life, are spent inside a highly controlled, high-pressure environment designed around performance, branding, and fan perception. And the unsettling part isn't just the length of time. It's what gets lost in the process. When someone spends their entire adolescence in a system that rewards perfection, obedience, and constant availability, it raises real questions about autonomy later on. How much of their adult identity is something they chose, and how much of it was shaped to fit a marketable role? You can admire someone's success and resilience while still questioning the structure that put them in that position so early. Longevity shouldn't come at the cost of childhood, privacy, or the basic freedom to grow up outside of a spotlight. Because when you strip it down, the issue isn't just how long idols stay in the industry, it's how early the industry claims them. Let's not forget that idols train for years before debut. It doesn't just start when we first see them. Take Ji-Yo, for example. She spent about 20 years under JYP Entertainment and is now 29. She joined JYP as a trainee at just 8 years old, and it was later revealed that she had already trained under SM Entertainment before that. So how young was she when she started at SM? That raises a bigger question. Why are companies taking in children who are barely out of early childhood as trainees? Looking at newer groups, the pattern doesn't really change. In Hearts to Hearts, Jiwoo debuted at 19 after training for 6 years, which means she started around 13 and even dropped out of middle school to focus on training. Yeon was scouted in 6th grade at just 12 years old and debuted only 3 years later. When you lay it all out like this, it becomes hard to ignore just how young these trainees are when they're pulled into the system, and how much of their formative years are shaped entirely by the industry. Back to my main point. There's a huge difference between a group where one member is 15 and the rest are adults, versus a group where the adult is 18 and everyone else is still a child. Having a 21-year-old in the group doesn't magically make it okay. It just turns that person into a babysitter in a system that was never designed to protect kids in the first place. There's a reason Liso's debut at 14 was controversial. There's a reason people were uncomfortable with Wonyoung debuting at 14 and using "but she did it too" as a defense is not the argument you think it is. All you're doing is pointing to another example of the same problem. Let's be honest about what's actually happening here. A lot of fans are using history as a moral shield, not because they truly believe it's right, but because they don't want to feel uncomfortable supporting a group with extremely young members. So instead of questioning the system, they normalize it. Minors have always debuted. They're talented. This is their dream. None of those arguments address the real issue. Talent does not override vulnerability. Being skilled does not make a 13 or 14-year-old emotionally, legally, or mentally prepared for an industry built on scrutiny, objectification, and relentless pressure. If a kid can't legally sign a contract without their parents, they shouldn't be signing their life away to an entertainment company. That's not radical. That's basic ethics. And let's talk about the environment you're pushing these kids into. Survival shows where minors are edited, criticized, and ranked for public consumption. Fans stalking idols at airports and calling it normal fan behavior. Mobbing, filming, invading privacy, sexualizing underage performers, sending hate. All of it treated like part of the culture instead of what it actually is, dangerous. People love to say, they've been trainees for years, so they're not too young. Sehwon became a trainee at 4 years old, freaking 4. There was literally going to be a show called Under 15. The industry has never had a lower age limit, and that's the problem here, not the defense. People love using Nikki, Yuna, or Wonyoung as examples of, see, they turned out fine, is willful ignorance. All of them were internet punching bags before they even turned 18. They were sexualized, criticized, and dragged while still children. Acting like that didn't happen doesn't make it go away. And the argument, it's what they want, is one of the weakest of all. I wanted to be married with a baby when I was 7. I changed my dream career every year. I'm 20 now, and I still don't know exactly what I want to study or whether I'll regret my choices. A kid does not have the life experience to understand what it means to give up privacy, normal development, and long-term freedom for a contract and a spotlight. Kids don't make lifelong decisions. They grow into them. So when people say if they were too young, they wouldn't be allowed to debut, I genuinely have to laugh. Companies would take infants if it meant securing longevity. The system is built to benefit the company, not to protect the child, and this is where fans come in. You're not just passive observers. You're part of the system. When you defend the debut of minors, when you downplay concerns, when you hype up a 13-year-old because he's my favorite, you're helping normalize a structure that thrives on putting children into adult pressure. This isn't about hating idols. It's about refusing to pretend that something harmful is harmless just because it's wrapped in talent, dreams, and pretty stages. There is nothing progressive or realistic about pushing kids into an industry known for burnout, exploitation, and relentless public scrutiny. Wanting a child to thrive does not mean wanting them on a survival show in front of cameras and under contracts they can't fully understand. So no, stop saying minors have always debuted as if that magically makes it okay. The scale is different, the pressure is different, the exposure is different, and the consequences are very, very real. If your age range starts with barely an adult and goes down to middle school, that is not normal. It shouldn't be defended, and pretending otherwise isn't protecting idols. It's protecting your own comfort as a fan. With that said, we've come to the end of this video. I know it was a long one, so thank you so much if you made it to the end. It really means a lot to me. As always, if you have anything to add, feel free to agree or disagree with what I said. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more. Bye!